It's Vendetta time! Hey everybody! So if you have no idea who I am, I'm Sam, better known as Kill.the.lights, and I am a little obsessed with Resident Evil. So in order to prepare for Death Island, I decided to go through all the CGI Resident Evil media, that is, Degeneration, Damnation, Infinite Darkness, and last but not least, Vendetta. So yeah, we're gonna go over Resident Evil Vendetta, which is a whole moment. So how this works is I will give you a complete synopsis of everything that happens in the movie, and that means spoilers abound. So if you don't want it spoiled, you should go see it for yourself. The link is down below. Honestly, bit of a spoiler warning here. I think that you should watch this movie, particularly if you're going to see Death Island, because it leads directly into Death Island. Hint, hint. Go watch the movie, otherwise you can't be mad at me. So after I tell you everything that happens in the movie, I will tell you what is important to the overarching Resident Evil canon, what I think of the movie as a movie, and I rank it. And how I rank all of my media is, was it worth watching once? Was it not worth watching at all? And is it worth watching multiple times? Bit of a spoiler warning, I have seen this one multiple times, and it's fun every time. But seriously. Let's actually get into this. So, first of all, I need you guys to adjust your expectations here. You cannot expect me to be in any way, shape, or form normal when this is Rebecca's first appearance since Resident Evil, like, canonically, unless you count the stage play. Did you guys know there's a stage play? Most people don't. It's Japanese only, but there's English subtitles. Baby girl Becca was the first character I played in Resident Evil 0, and honestly, if you need any proof of how much I love my baby girl Becca, I recognized her boots in the first 11 seconds of the Project W trailer for Dead by Daylight. Becca's in it! Aside from Rebecca, we also have Leon and Chris, but Leon and Chris are in, like, everything, So now let me set the scene for the story. So this takes place after Resident Evil 6, but before Resident Evil 7. It's a movie that came out in 2017, but it takes place in 2014. There's still some of the wild tech from Resident Evil 6, so if that bothers you, like, something to be aware of. Now, with all that out of the way, Vendetta technically starts with Leon, and in this, Leon is still voiced by Matt Mercer, for those of you that mourn him not being in video games anymore. He's in the movies. And Leon is walking through a morgue and giving this pretty depressing speech about how this isn't how he thought his life would turn out and how he's kind of unhappy about it. The body bags start moving, Leon shoots the body bag, and then we don't see him for a while because we switch to Chris. And what Chris is doing, Chris is a part of a raid on a remote mansion that is said to be the house of a weapons dealer, bioweapons specifically, named Glenn, I'm going to mispronounce his name about 400 times, Arias? Got it in one. Chris is actually acting as the BSAA's representative here, and warns one of the men that there's absolutely nothing heroic about what they're doing, that you're gonna have to kill BOWs that look like your friends, your family, your children. It's not a job to be glorified. Now, if you watch nothing else of this movie, I would recommend watching this scene with Chris and the assault on the mansion, because it's just so reminiscent of the original Resident Evil. It's like the architecture's gonna get you, and then I really like this scene, okay? The mission is to recover a BSAA undercover operative named Kathy and her son, while also trying to manage to nab Arias. Now the thing is, this mansion scene, now the mansion layout is very much similar to the Spencer mansion, but more than that, it's this slow sense of something being wrong before that tension snaps. The first mistake is the squad splits up, and you know, if you've seen a horror movie, that means people are gonna die. In the dining room, there's a fully set table and burning candles. The first squad relaxes. They feel safe. The wallpaper is peeling away. A clock strikes 3 a.m. Chris's squad relaxes. There's a lump under a bed. They uncover a pillow and a toy truck. Squad 3 relaxes. The toy truck's wheels spin. They turn to see a small boy in the corner with the controller. The squad tries to comfort him. He's a BOW, so that ends exactly how you would expect it to. Chris and his group run at the sound of gunfire, but they arrive too late. There's no sign of anything amiss until someone gets dragged under the bed in like the most nightmare-fueled way possible. Chris opens fire on the BOWs, but hesitates with the boy. It's Kathy's son, the one that they were sent to recover. The only remaining member of the group has been bitten, and I just want to take a second to praise the fact that the movie actually gives pause here. Chris looks at the bite, at the man's face, and we get to see this very quick turn into a zombie before Chris has to kill the guy. It's good. Like, I wish more zombie movies did this instead of this slow turn where the person gets sick and contemplates killing themselves, because it just comes off a little melodramatic. And the cinematography of everything right here is just really cool. Back in the dining room, Squad 1 has noticed something is wrong. They call for evac, but too late. A zombie who's been torn in half kills 2, but the remaining 2 run. They run right into razor wire. There's a pause before they slowly slide apart. The blood drips off the wires, and just beyond the trap is Glenn Arias. He observes before walking away. Arias is such a cool villain, so like... Elsewhere, Chris is making a mad dash out of the mansion. He hesitates to shoot some of the zombies before eventually just jumping out of the window when he becomes overwhelmed. This ends up leading him right into Arias. They fight briefly in a way that, frankly, is not dissimilar from Leon and Krauser's knife fight from hell in Resident Evil 4. Just a lot less banter. Arias ends up winning. He laments having to move his business, and then he introduces one of his products. It's Kathy, led by a hulking BOW, who we later learned is named Diego Gomez, and a more human-looking BOW, Maria Gomez. They sick the infected woman on Chris before making their escape. Arias' weapons can actually differentiate between friend and foe, so they literally just walk away as the other zombies from the mansion flood towards Chris. In the last second, an evac chopper makes it just in time to save Chris, somehow not shooting Chris even as they open fire on the zombies. It's fine. And then there's, frankly, this entire sequence gets ruined by a very silly scene where Chris is cradling Kathy's dead body, the one person he was there to save, and screams, "No!" as the mansion explodes right behind him. I swear, so much of this movie goes from being like a masterclass in like how to do good horror to the most cheesy, awful thing ever. It's so inconsistent. I love it. And then we get an actual, like, proper title sequence. I miss these being in movies so badly. I love a good title sequence because it gives me time to, like, get hyped for the movie. I don't know. Maybe that's just me. I love a good title sequence in a movie, alright? So after the title sequence, we get a flashback of Glenn Arias and a blonde Rebecca's wedding. Blonde Rebecca is actually named Sarah, but Sarah doesn't matter. It's just important that Sarah looks like a blonde Rebecca, so we're calling her Blonde Rebecca. A plane flies overhead and bombs the wedding. Glenn somehow manages to survive with his dead wife's hand still grasped in his, and that's literally all that's left of her. Then he gets his dramatic "No!" In the present, he's actually still wearing his wedding ring, and he looks out over a city skyline, claiming that he's doing all of this for his wife. I don't think any woman thinks murder is romantic. Anyway, in Chicago, we finally get to see Rebecca, who is working at a university. She's trying to develop a vaccine for a BOW that's been causing small pockets of attacks, no large-scale outbreaks, just a handful of people here or there. News of it has been suppressed by the BSAA. We also learn Rebecca's coffee order, which is a caramel macchiato with whipped cream and chocolate chips. It's more of a dessert than a coffee. The attacks. Rebecca theorizes that this isn't the T virus or the C virus. This must be something entirely new with an entirely new group behind it. And she's already prepping a test vaccine because she's a genius. Need I remind you that she became a STARS member when she was only 18? And she 1v1'd a Tyrant when she was 18. I mean, I know Resident Evil 0 is kind of cheesy, but, like, it's worth mentioning. Rebecca ends up sending her research assistant to retrieve some infected bodies for testing. We follow him down the hall, and he notices a vent cover that's been displaced. He approaches the vent cover and is quickly killed by Maria, who just comes up behind him and snaps his neck. It's beautiful. I love Maria. She's amazing. Back with Rebecca, her simulations find out that her vaccine works. It works. It works. Yay, right? Game over. Everything's done, right? No. The university immediately goes into lockdown, which is so convenient, but I don't even care. Because Maria is actually distributing an airborne form of the virus. I put air quotes around that, and you'll see later when we explain, but virus, quote unquote. Rebecca breathes in the airborne virus and begins to return, but she forces herself to her feet and makes her way to where the sample vaccines are being printed. She manages to inject herself, which saves her from infection, but not the infected. After retrieving the data for the vaccine, Rebecca finds her turned assistant. She only hesitates for a second until he lunges at her, at which point my girl, who 1v1'd a Tyrant, beats him to death with a fire extinguisher. I'm not kidding. She hesitates, she's scared, and then she just beats him to death with a fire extinguisher. It's beautiful. After, her research assistant is well and truly dead, not just undead dead, she takes a second to question what's happening, but more zombies are upon her, so she runs. She ends up returning to her workspace and hiding under a desk as more zombies pass by. She also takes the time to hydrate, because hydration is important, both to your body and the plot in this case, but we'll get to that. She's attacked again, and my girl, who 1v1'd a Tyrant, stabs him in the face with scissors, because she's a badass. Anyway, while that's happening, we see Maria destroying, I think it's a server room, regardless, it's where Rebecca stores the data, but Rebecca already has a copy of the data, so whoops. As more zombies try to attack an unarmed Rebecca, Chris and his BSAA squad finally show up. He asks if she's alright, and she just kind of looks around because, my bro, nothing about this is alright. And then it's just thumbs up, because we're just gonna forget that thumbs up weren't actually her thing, it was Chris's thing. That doesn't bother me at all, I promise. Oh, gosh. Later, after the BSAA is 100% on scene and controlling the outbreak, Rebecca scolds Chris because he's not wearing a clean suit, not a mask, he's not quarantining her, and Chris is like, well, I need your help now. Ignore the fact that you're, under a shock blanket. Just take a shower, you'll be fine. Later, when she's put up in, I think it's a motel room, it looks like a shitty motel room, Rebecca is watching the news where we see that news of the outbreaks has actually leaked, and Rebecca is mapping them. It turns out that all of these small pockets of outbreaks have happened around the Great Lakes. Chris arrives and scolds her for not resting more, and she suggests, hey, well, we need to send out the data for the vaccine? But Chris doesn't want to. He then explains that Arius took over Tricell and Neo Umbrella and has been selling their weapons. The new strain that Rebecca has been researching is the result. And when he heard that Rebecca was the researcher, of course he sought her help. This entire section's a little info-dumpy and all over the place, but we'll get through it, okay? Rebecca then theorizes that because she sent in her findings to the World Health Organization, which then distributes the information that she gave them to hundreds of organizations, literally an untrackable number of sources could have leaked her findings to Arius. Which, just outside of this, it's so weird to hear an actual legitimate organization like the World Health Organization just be referenced in Resident Evil. It's, I know Resident Evil is technically placed in, reality, but also, it's just weird to me. It's weird. We have holograms and we're talking. Moving on. Rebecca then explains that this virus has similar genetic markers to Las Plagas, but that she can't confirm Arias having any connection to Los Illuminados, and this entire section just fucking loses me. Las Plagas is a parasite. How would it share genetic markers with a virus? I'm not a scientist. Whatever. This is their excuse for using Leon instead of, like, Billy Cohen from Resident Evil 0. Whatever. This connection is what leads them to going and seeking out Leon for help. Because we have to have Leon in this. He's kind of the poster boy for these movies, if you can't tell. So while they're on the way to pick up Leon, Rebecca actually talks to Chris's squad. She explains her backstory and why she made the switch to medical science. She wanted to find a cure for the disease that is corrupt organizations, corrupt pharmaceutical companies like Umbrella. But she uses her brain while Chris uses his muscles. There's also a Breaking Bad shout out. I don't understand it. It's just kind of there. I think it's because Breaking Bad referenced Resident Evil. I don't know. Breaking Bad is in this. It's weird. So now we get to cut to Leon's alcoholism. Leon's alcoholism is a whole plot point in and of itself. Rebecca and Chris tell Leon that they need his help, and Leon flat out refuses. So Rebecca starts interrogating him about Los Illuminados. Leon claims not to remember, and Chris takes a much more critical stance towards Leon. And at this point, I would like to remind you that the plot point that they are using for Leon in here, the whole story arc, is the same story arc that Chris went through in 6, minus the amnesia. He lost his squad and blames himself, so he's self-medicating, and Chris is actually using the same approach with Leon that Piers used with him. There's also a novelization, apparently, that changes and adds context to this scene. I don't think it's available in English, and even then, I'm not a big novelization person. End of the day, it's not in the movie, so we're just going to discount it entirely. And a little bit of a funny part of this sequence, when Chris tells the waitress not to give Leon any more alcohol, and Leon just pulls out his flask. It's... oh, someone get him into therapy and AA, please. Like, alcoholism is very serious, guys. There's no shame in it, but please do seek help. While Chris is off being aggressive, Rebecca takes a much gentler approach, apologizing for the interruption to his vacation, and asking for whatever information he can give them. We cut away before he gives any information. And this cut is so that we know that Arias is stalking them. He orders Maria to kill everybody except Rebecca because Rebecca looks like his late wife. And that's not creepy at all. Rebecca and Chris very briefly talk about what's been happening, and we veer off to talk about how Leon lost his whole squad. And look, like, he's obviously frustrated and struggling, but like, in terms of the narrative, this whole speech from Leon is entirely out of place. Like, he's talking about how hopeless it all is, and then nobody really addresses or responds to it. They just skip past it like he didn't say anything at all. It bothers me, because this is your supposedly a friend, or at least somebody that you've known for a while, being like, hey, I have nothing in my life right now. I'm going through a really hard time. And you're just like, anyway, so Arias. Chris refocuses on Arias and explains that Arias' wedding was targeted due to his black market dealings. Now, being alone in the world, Arias has a score to settle with the powers that took his wife and family away from him by taking other people's spouses and family. Great plan, Arias. And you know what? Points for Leon here, because he actually points out that, like, okay, so we're supposed to be against Arias because he's attacking the government, but the government dropped a bomb on a wedding. Like, who's the good guy here? Not the government! Which Leon would know. He works for the government. Chris argues that Arias is the real bad guy, and Rebecca plays peacekeeper, and somehow comes to the conclusion that Leon and Chris are really similar. They're not. Not to me, at least. Anyway. Rebecca then proceeds to explain that the virus isn't new. It's a latent virus that lives in people. We don't need the virus, we need the trigger. Her cure works, but unfortunately, the host virus can be reactivated at any time. So she gives them both a vial of her blood and asks them to take action before going to the bathroom. It's literally just a call to action, and then she leaves to go to the bathroom. While in the bathroom, she looks at her reflection and mentions that she wasn't very nice. Because, Rebecca is nice. She's a sweetheart. And this was not nice of her. But you know what? I feel like it was necessary. Then she finds a woman dead in one of the stalls, and Maria just comes up behind her, attacks her, and kidnaps her. Go Maria. She's a stealthy girl. Back with Chris and Leon, a man runs in asking for Leon, and Leon is very not happy because this guy, Patricio, betrayed him and resulted in the deaths of his team. Patricio begs Leon for help, saying that his family is in danger. Patricio's family lives in Spain, and an arms dealer, Arias, is being paid by the surviving members of Los Illuminados to launch a bioterror attack. And because Patricio knows too much, he worries that him and his family will be killed. Now, this isn't touched on ever again. It's literally just to make Leon help Chris and Rebecca, but it ends up just being wholly unnecessary because of what's about to happen. Like, they keep mentioning Los Illuminados and Las Plagas, and it has no narrative importance. They could have just scrapped it and nobody would have noticed. Chris says that, we should try to get information from Patricio because he could lead us to Arias. And Patricio again repeats that his family is in danger while confirming that he was in fact referring to Arias earlier when he said arms dealer. Leon denies him help unless Patricio is able to give him useful information. But before they're able to get any information, they're attacked by Diego with a minigun and Arias' men. Arias' men technically aren't really a part of it. Diego with the minigun does most of the work. But they're there. The waitress and Patricio die in the attack. Leon thinks that Patricio led Arias to them, but with his dying breath, Patricio once again cries to Leon begging for his family to be protected. None of this Patricio and his family are there for convenience and guilt purposes only. Beyond the gunfire, Chris manages to see Maria carrying an unconscious Rebecca, and Maria confirms Chris's death to Arias without really making any effort to confirm it. Seriously, she could have avoided all of this if she was just like, hey, ceasefire, let's go in and make sure they're dead. But no, we move on. We move on, right? Leon kind of vaguely agrees to help since the hotel is now destroyed and Rebecca's been taken. But if, you didn't read that as confirmation that he's going to help, Patricio's phone rings. And because it somehow fell out of Patricio's pocket and Leon happened to pick it up, Leon answers. It's Patricio's wife. She is scared. She misses her husband. Her daughter is crying for him in the background. And she eventually catches on that it's not her husband on the line and begins to panic. Leon hangs up on her, doesn't even tell her that Patricio's dead. And none of this matters except that Chris thinks that there could be some kind of information on the phone that would be useful, and reiterates that he needs Leon's help. That Leon is kind of already offered. Maybe that's a translation thing, I don't know. We fade away to resident Mr. Creepy Glenn Arias. Rather, we find Rebecca waking up. She's been dressed in his late wife's wedding dress and trapped in a replica of their wedding reception, which is so many levels of creepy, and if it wasn't creepy enough, at the tables, there are all boxes that are groaning and moving. These are the remains of Arias' family that he was able to recover. He arrives in his wedding suit and explains that he was able to reanimate them, but hasn't been able to stop the process of, rotting and decay. So his family's just kind of slowly rotting away, even though they're quote-unquote alive, undead, whatever. He greets Rebecca pretty friendly and introduces himself before even going so far as unchaining her. He compliments her on finding a cure for the virus. She must be brilliant, right? And Rebecca explains how she found it works. Arias eventually names it as the A virus. Rebecca explains that there are 3 strands of the virus. 1, initial infection. 2, the trigger. And the 3rd enables him to control the BOW's target. This is the same as the vaccine, meaning effectively you can just nullify the infection by saying no one is your enemy? I don't know. It's confusing. Back with Leon and Chris, they're actually looking at the map that she mapped out earlier, but alas, neither is Rebecca, so we let her explain that Arius laced the first virus into drinking water sourced from the Great Lakes, which is apparently a massive source of drinking water. I wouldn't know. I live in the South. And the outbreaks were not planned at all. In fact, the little pocket outbreaks represent a small error percentage of people who will display the infection without the presence of the trigger. The trigger in its gaseous form is what Maria distributed earlier, which, you probably gathered, considering I put quote-unquote virus. Rebecca says that alone, these two things are absolutely useless, but together they create the perfect BOW, and Arias is reasonably impressed. Elsewhere, Leon figures out, the trigger must be airborne. Chris assumes Arias must vaccinate anyone he doesn't want to turn. It's the same information, yada yada, they have to know the same things. It's beside the point. Arias asks Rebecca what she plans to do with all this information, and she explains that not only does she have a test cure, but her blood is with her team. So, the A virus will be obsolete before it ever hits the market. Arias disagrees. After all, if it had been a full cure, his bioweapons never would have attacked her. But they did. Not that it really matters in the end, because he doesn't want her dead. Rebecca then expresses some empathy for what happened to Arias on his wedding day, and he brings up a slideshow with his wife, blonde Rebecca, and Diego before he was turned into the hulking BOW he is today. I feel so bad for Diego in this. Arias says that meeting Rebecca couldn't be a coincidence. It must be fate so that he can use her as a replacement for his wife, Sarah. He'll rewrite his past. He also pulls out his dead wife's hand before taking off her ring and trying to place it on Rebecca's hand. She fights back and he ends up backhanding her to the ground and having a little breakdown. He then decides that he doesn't want Rebecca as she is. He wants to replace her arm with that of his decaying dead wife's in order to change Rebecca's mind somehow. Having a part of Sarah be a part of her would somehow make her feel differently about him. Glenn Arias is very unstable because that's not how that works. Attaching a decaying limb does not do something to somebody's brain. It just rots off of them, I would assume. Patricio's phone does actually have some useful information. It literally has Arias' entire attack plan. He's going to launch the trigger virus upon New York City, and that he has vaccine on hand for the people that he doesn't want infected. They somehow figure out that Arias has a hideout in New York, and the vaccine is likely stored there, and Rebecca's probably there too. I'm going to assume that's some information that Chris got off screen. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It's one of those things that I am willing to just assume they found out in some way off screen. Arias has a hideout in New York City. Arias calls Maria and tells her to push the attack forward. He tells Rebecca that with Maria and Diego, they will all start a new life together. In another place, which isn't really specified, it's just another place, Maria comforts Diego, her father, who he actually seems to be in a lot of physical pain with the mutations to his body, and she asks for him to wish her luck. He tries his best to hold her hand before she walks away to do Arias' bidding. Trucks with the trigger head out to set positions throughout New York City, and Arias has another costume change as he looks out on the city, because of course, Arias is a fashionable man. Seriously, this man goes through so many costume changes, it's weird. Nobody else goes through costume changes except for Rebecca, once. Twice. She goes through 2 costume changes. Arias goes through 4. We see a man in New York City digging through the trash when he notices the truck. As the trigger's released, he becomes one of the first changed, and we see this happen all throughout the city. Some people change, others don't, and it's absolute chaos in the streets, whoops. And I suppose now is probably the best time to give you the names of Chris's squad. We have DC, Damien, and Nadia. Now, Chris, DC, Damien, Nadia, and Leon are all dosed up with Rebecca's vaccine as they prepare to head into New York City. Nadia warns them that they will have no backup from state police because they just can't get there in time. They decide that they have to blow up the trucks. The trigger virus apparently has the same igniting point as gasoline, so they're just going to blow it up. That's not scary at all. Leon lists off their 3 goals. Tanker, Rebecca, deploy vaccine, and Chris adds they have to get Arias too, so 4. DC and Nadia stay aboard their aircraft while Damien, Chris, and Leon head into the city. Now, this should not bode well for Damien. And also, somebody had the bright idea to give Leon a motorcycle, and I can only assume that he doesn't immediately crash it because of Claire, our resident motorcyclist. We love that. Chris and Damien take an armored SUV. They approach the first tanker and very quickly blow it up with some grenades. There's actually a work truck that behind it that starts like rocking back and forth. When I say work truck, I don't know if you guys mean like are picturing the same thing that I do. It's like a van with a massive empty space in the back, so it's a work van, I guess. It doesn't matter. It's a vehicle. Damien approaches the truck, and so he dies via zombie dog. I mean, there are certainly worse ways to go in the Resident Evil universe. It's still pretty bad, though. Leon ends up drawing off the dogs while Chris goes to blow up more tankers. But first, Chris is actually given a second to mourn Damien. We don't actually see Damien's body, which I am so thankful for, because now, the scene with Leon and the dogs on the highway is iconic, hilarious, must watch for that alone. You gotta see it yourself. And again, Leon should have died here, but he doesn't, because he's Leon S. Kennedy. I think we've established Leon is dead about 700 times over in the Resident Evil universe if we applied the laws of, like, natural human beings, but that doesn't matter. Rebecca is in a medical room, chained down. Arias comes in just to say that Rebecca is going to be injected with a more powerful trigger that will take effect in half an hour. Access to her blood helped them improve upon the gaseous trigger, but unfortunately now it has to be injected. As she's injected, he leaves, and we now have a time limit. And actually at this point, I checked the time left in the movie, and there is exactly 30 minutes left with the credits. So bonus points, because I love when we get a time limit and it's actually reflected in the runtime of the movie. Maria ends up being injured in one of the tanker explosions, and as such, she misses a lot of this movie. I would have a problem sidelining a villain as cool as her, but she's in Death Island, so we'll see. She better have, like, bad moments, like badass moments. Chris is the first to arrive at Arias' hideout, and Arias is monitoring him, so over the intercom, he welcomes Chris, tells him about the improvements of the virus, and generally just taunts him. Chris sets a timer based on what Arias says, as for how long he has until Rebecca is permanently changed. Arias explains that he is going to bring down the world's government before he just releases his zombies to kill Chris. Chris fighting zombies is such a brutally efficient thing to watch. Like, Leon's all silly flair, but Chris moves so very differently, and I love it. You gotta see it. You gotta see it. Particularly since Leon eventually joins in, and it's Leon, who always has that flair for just being dramatic. He literally brings the motorcycle into the building, and it kills me every time. Like, he even takes the time to properly park the motorcycle in this hallway, and it's uncanny to me and very funny. Leon and his motorcycle. Like, forget shipping him with anyone else. It's Leon on the motorcycle. Now, this fight is admittedly cool with Leon added in, but like, gosh, knives, guys. Leon is the guy who advised Ada that knives work better for close encounters, but the guy can't fucking do it himself. This happened in Infinite Darkness and Damnation, and it's not really prevalent in Degeneration. But this has happened in, like, every single piece of CGI media where it's like Leon just does not effectively use his weapons. He's just shooting people at point-blank range, and it's like, You're the guy that said knives work better for close encounters. You literally were trained to fight with knives specifically by Krauser, and we're just never using it. It's funny, okay? It's gotta be funny. Just, in general, this is probably the biggest issue I have with the fight, like the fight choreography, because the fight choreography otherwise is like really cool, but it's a lot of close quarters fights, and we aren't getting a wicked knife fight. Instead, it's just people trying to shoot each other at close quarters with semi-automatic weapons, and it's weird. I will rant about that for way too long, so we're gonna move on and go to Arias. He's looking out at the city and expressing happiness at the carnage he has wrought, because Arias is a very messed up dude. Chris and Leon split up, with Leon continuing to battle zombies and Chris going for Rebecca, and honestly, Leon seems like he's having a little bit of a traumatic moment here. He's probably on vacation because he's not cleared to work in the field, I swear. Chris gets to the medical room and finds Rebecca. He also finds Diego, who fights him, which kind of just leaves Rebecca chained down, infected, and watching helplessly as Chris tries to fight Diego. And honestly, Chris takes Diego down pretty cleverly, so like... However, Rebecca is running out of time, and Chris gets the vaccine location by threatening the doctor, who did try to attack Chris with a scalpel. It wasn't very successful, though. On the roof, Arias is guarding the vaccine, because yes, the vaccine is stored via roof access, I guess. When Chris and Rebecca actually get up there, Becca is actually shot in the leg because Arias gets the jump on them. He calls Chris predictable, and they exchange short bursts of semi-automatic gunfire at close range. And somehow no one except Rebecca gets hit in all of this. But it's still pretty fun, okay? I'm willing to look past it because it's fun, but this was the moment where I ended up banging my head on my table because I was watching this at my computer, and just, knives work better for close encounters. You look past it though and it just becomes funny, so. However, eventually, Glenn Arias pulls out a knife and manages to disarm Chris. Chris launches them both onto a skylight, and they have a brief standoff before Arias falls through the skylight thanks to Chris's skull being smashed against the glass enough that it weakens. And then he throws Arias into it, and it's already weak enough that Arias goes through the glass. Chris has so much head trauma during this, probably. At least Rebecca's a doctor. At this point, Chris returns to Rebecca's side, and she has no hope for herself and begs for him to kill her. However, Chris does not, because it's Chris Redfield. And meanwhile, the nearly dead Arias, who fell an indeterminate number of stories, and a charred Diego meet. Arias orders Diego to proceed to the final stage, and this transformation is so horrifying. Like, it's nightmare fuel. Anyway, this new monster that forms from this is both Arias and Diego. However, I'm going to continue calling it Arias because Arias is the one speaking, and it feels more like Arias in Diego's body, if that makes sense. Arias corners Chris just before he's able to get Rebecca the vaccine. The monster design is pretty similar to other Final Resident Evil bosses, but it's still quite cool, like the different movesets. Oh, it's classic Resident Evil monster design, okay? Arias actually defeats Chris and has him held in a single hand, squeezing him to death when the elevator dings. It's Leon on a motorcycle. Yeah, Leon took the motorcycle onto the roof. He's not getting any brownie points for sense, but it's very cool. Leon uses the bike to knock out one of Arias's legs, which frees Chris. Leon is once again thrown into a concrete wall and then slammed into solid concrete by Arias with such force that it leaves a crater. So Leon is very dead again, but he's not, because we're just not subscribing to, like, reality. It's fine. Leon and Arias continue fighting, and Leon ends up almost falling off of the building, which would be certain death. Meanwhile, Rebecca is continuing to turn, and Chris is trying to find the vaccine. He does, but we gotta cut back to that epic fight. My girl Nadia comes in clutch with a railgun, which she shoots from the aircraft, saving Leon and destroying several other buildings in New York City with the beam. Arias is not stopped, but Diego's face has been destroyed, which enrages Arias enough that he attacks the aircraft. Nadia ends up injured as Arias laughs, ha ha ha! Leon has a bright idea. Remember how I said he hasn't crashed the bike? By bike, he launches it with pinpoint accuracy at Arias and shoots the gas tank. Somehow this doesn't harm the aircraft. Whatever. Arias tries to save himself from the fall, but Leon hops in just to fire a grenade at Arias's glowing, pulsating heart. His flesh falls to the street level, and his wedding ring drops, bounces, and rolls away. I'm a sucker for that shot. Rebecca manages to be saved with the vaccine and gives another thumbs up that she's okay. And here's the thing. Here I get the thumbs up because she genuinely cannot speak, considering the vaccine is inhaled and she's probably very weak. DC and Nadia end up distributing the airborne vaccine across the city with the aircraft, which turns everyone who was turned back into human beings. Which begs the question, do they now have to live with the guilt of the people they killed? Did Chris and Leon murder completely innocent people who were just sick? We're thinking about it too deeply. It doesn't matter. Resident Evil, we're just going to drop that. They play a short section of Leon's speech from the beginning as the group flies above New York City, still distributing that vaccine. Rebecca interrupts, lamenting that they are back where they started, hoping they made the world safer. Leon asks Chris how long they can keep doing this, and Chris teases him about not planning too far ahead, quoting him exactly from earlier in the movie. Back at Arias' hideout, Maria finds what's left of her father, which sets up her grudge. And then we get the credits rolling with another banger in credits song. It's so fucking good. Now, if you're going to see Death Island, you have to see Vendetta. It directly precedes Death Island. It sets up Maria Gomez as the villain, and I expect more connections will be made, but that's just what I can tell from the trailer without seeing the movie. As far as other connections to Resident Evil media, it's not referenced in 7 or 8, so it doesn't really matter. 7 and 8 are very much focused on Ethan, so it doesn't really apply too much. I do think that there's a little bit of a link if you consider the fact that the BSAA was covering up small-scale outbreaks of bioweapons, and then connect that to the corruption in 8, where they are actively using bioweapons to fight bioweapons. But that's a very flimsy thing. It's not something that is like, oh my gosh, I have to watch this in order to make it make sense. However, I definitely think that this is a fun watch, and I would probably put it on par with Degeneration, which, if y'all didn't watch that, I love it. It's much more modern and less campy, but the fight scenes are great. Chris's opening sequence in the mansion is great. Arias is a wonderful villain that is giving an appropriate amount of depth for his role in such a short period of time. Like, he was very believable in the movie. The movie took him seriously. It gave him the time of day in the way that other villains in Resident Evil sometimes aren't. Like, I think that in this case, Arias was given more space within the narrative than Alex Wesker was in Revelations 2. So, take that for what you will. Now, what did I not like? So, I do hate that my girl Rebecca, who 1v1'd a tyrant back in her Stars days and fought alongside Chris and Jill, takes on such a damsel in distress type role. But to be fair, she is infected for most of it. Though I feel like if this was Chris or Leon and they were infected, they just would have kept fighting, you know, like Leon does in like all of RE4. It's a little bit different treatment that I feel like wouldn't be given to Rebecca if Rebecca was any other character. But then again, That's me drawing on her Resident Evil Zero characterization, and I don't even think most people care about Resident Evil Zero. There's a lot of fun lore in the files, though, when it comes to, like, Birkin and Wesker and Umbrella as a whole. Sorry, that's me promoting my Resident Evil Zero propaganda. Whoops, sorry. And if you couldn't tell based on my synopsis of the events of Vendetta, I don't think Leon's inclusion was necessary at all. The weakest parts of this movie are trying to tie the A virus to Las Plagas and thus Leon. They make such an effort to make him necessary that they didn't do in Damnation, but the efforts aren't good. So on one hand, I'm glad that they at least made the effort to make him important to the narrative, but at the same time, it just doesn't work for me. You could have taken Leon out entirely and just had Chris and Rebecca, and the movie would have been literally the same. Leon in Vendetta is effectively Claire in Infinite Darkness. It's a fan service inclusion. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but the movie probably would have been better without trying to run itself in circles to make itself need him. Like, honestly, if Chris had just said, hey, we need backup and I know just the guy, and Leon was just like, okay, cool, I would have no problem with this. Like, that would... I'd be like, oh yeah, Leon being in it is A-okay with me. It's 100% just because, I don't know. Leon's need to save people has been a driving force of his character since the original Resident Evil 2. So, Los Illuminados threatening Patricio's family through Arias, and A-Virus's similarity to Las Plagas, a parasite, which just doesn't make sense at all, is just, it's unnecessary. Now I do have to clarify something, because earlier I mentioned Billy Cohen from Resident Evil Zero. There was apparently, allegedly, a brief period where the production was considering putting him in this, and it was very quickly scrapped, and frankly, I don't think Billy should ever return, but I do think he would have been easier to integrate into Vendetta than Leon. Honestly, before we consider adding Billy Cohen to anything new and anything Resident Evil, you need to make a Resident Evil Zero remake, because the man has no character. He was literally just a stand-in because they wanted a second protagonist. I swear. But yeah, with that said, you're all set for Death Island. And I really do hope you enjoy it. I am concerned with how big the cast is, just because that's a lot of characters. Resident Evil Vendetta is the largest cast, and that was only 3 characters, and now we're hopping up to 5. That's a lot. However, super excited to see Jill again. Oh my gosh. Not a big fan of the redesigns on the girls, just saying, but nah, that's how it is. It's a minor thing. I could stand Degeneration's wonky CGI, it's fine. Now, if you can't see Vendetta prior to Death Island for whatever reason, here's what you need to know about Maria. 1, she's the product of the A virus. 2, she has specific beef with Leon, Chris, and Rebecca for the death of her father. And that's it. That's literally it. I'm really excited to see Maria, and I hope she doesn't take a back seat unless they're going to make a 3rd movie with her, which would be awesome. I like Maria a lot. And that's not just me being like, oh my gosh, pretty girl villain, I love that. Because I do. I love a good female villain, and Maria's awesome. I'm attached. Okay, I'm attached. When she dies, I'm gonna cry. I'm just gonna... tears. It's gonna be fine. It's gonna be fine. However, you have no excuse. You have no excuse to not see Vendetta, except for monetary excuses, because I'm going to drop a link down in the description so that you can buy or rent the movie on YouTube. And you should. You should watch this movie. Even if you watch Death Island without watching Vendetta, you should still come back and watch this movie. If only to see Leon take a motorcycle onto the roof of a skyscraper. It's funny. Oh, and if you guys didn't know, Nadia is canonically a lesbian, even though mentions of her partner were cut from the movie. So, like, happy Pride Month. But yeah, I really do hope that you guys see this movie. I enjoyed it, and I hope you guys will too. I mean, it's a lot more action-oriented than, like, Resident Evil games are, but I think it's a fun time, and I think it's worth the watch. You should give it a little bit of your time. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I hope you guys enjoy Vendetta if you decide to see it, and I hope you guys enjoy Death Island if you decide to see it. Like, let's have a good time. I would say, like, hey, if you want to keep up with the next video, but there's not going to be a next video. This is the last one in this little series, so, like, hey. So, if you want to see my other Resident Evil videos, I'll put the playlist here for all of my Resident Evil videos. I will put a suggested video here, just whatever YouTube thinks is best for you. And if you want to subscribe, because, you know, you got attached to me over the course of this, I don't know how long it's going to be video, like, subscribe. I'd love to see you for other stuff. Anyway, I guess that's it. Alright, bye-bye!